Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage by Peter Hammill.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
I am in a good mood today, and you might notice that because I have a smile on my face. I actually look not like a piece of garbage when making this video, and I am happy to be doing it. So with high energies, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So today we will be discussing The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage, being the third studio album by Peter Hammill. Now many of you might know this name from the seminal band called Van der Graaf Generator, a band which Peter Hammill pioneered and is still leading up until today. And Van der Graaf Generator has made countless appearances on this channel. Well, maybe not countless, I think about 4, but the main issue is that we've already discussed their backstory. There is nothing more new to say really about Van der Graaf Generator, so instead I will dedicate this video in order to talk about the life of Peter Hammill and what led to him creating the album we're reviewing today, being The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage. So Peter Joseph Andrew Hammill was born on the 5th of November 1948 in Ealing in England, which is yet another of those really odd English names. And growing up he would develop a very distinct musical taste and learning how to play the guitar and the piano, and even writing his own compositions at the age of 12. And when later on, when it came time for him to attend university, he went in the obvious route and started learning liberal studies in science. Of course, naturally. But nevertheless, the main event that happened while he was attending the University of Manchester was actually his acquaintance with a man called Chris Judge Smith. And Smith was determined to form a band. He was full of inspiration and he wanted to start work on it, so when he heard Peter Hammill's own compositions, he decided to get him on the project and join forces with him to form Van der Graaf Generator. Now, if there's something that I actually didn't tell you in the past about the band Van der Graaf Generator, and I honestly don't know how I've not told you this, is the origin of their name. So you might know that Van der Graaf Generator is based on the name of an invention made by Van de Graaff. Now the thing is, Van de Graaff is not spelled the same way. The original name is actually with a de and not a der, and the Graaf has 2 F's instead of the one that we know and love. And aside from this mishearing, Smith would later turn out to say that he thinks that the inspiration came from the fact that the Graaf actually died in 1967, which also happened to be the same year in which the name was coined. But this video is about Peter Hammill, so I better get back to talking about him. But if there's something that one must understand, is that both stories of Peter Hammill and Van der Graaf Generator have somewhat coincided in the pages of history, and a lot of them have influences one another. So the newly formed Van der Graaf Generator band signed with the Mercury record label, who, let's say it lightly, didn't really give them an easy time. And this hard relationship between the record company and the band themselves added to the fact that all of the band's equipment was stolen in 1969 led to a lot of frustration within the band, which ultimately led them to disband at the end of an actually pretty successful tour. So Peter Hammill, now left without a band, decided to come back to his original material that he was composing and recorded himself with the Trident Studios, and and to which recordings he actually made use of several Van der Graaf Generator members. But after some formal shindigs that same year, the band would actually go on to reform, and the project that Hamill was working on solely now became the debut album for Van der Graaf Generator, known as the Aerosol Grey Machine. But Hamill's original material that he worked on before joining Van der Graaf Generator would not entirely be used on the Aerosol Grey Machine, and actually a lot of it was left on the cutting room floor, so he would finally make use of it when he actually did his first solo album, being Fool's Mate, coming out in 1971. Now, Van der Graaf Generator released few albums until 1971 when they finally released their seminal album Pawn Hearts, but after that in 1972 the band would break up for the second time, leaving Hamill yet again without a band and with time to work on his solo career. Now, while the band was technically disbanded and they broke up, a lot of the members worked with Hamill on his solo project, so while the Van der Graaf Generator name ceased to exist for that time, you can definitely see that a lot of the solo records by Hamill consist mainly of Van der Graaf Generator members. So the question has to be asked: how different is the Peter Hamill solo project to the projects of Van der Graaf Generator, seeing as they consist mainly of the same people at the same time period? And well, the answer to this would be that most of the solo works by Peter Hamill could be in some sense considered as sort of hidden Van der Graaf Generator albums. Personally, I would note that the main difference between the two is that the solo work by Peter Hamill seems much more personal and self-reflective, while the stories being told on the Van der Graaf Generator songs are much more broad-themed in general. And this is where our information train stops for today in 1974, with the album we're reviewing today being The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage. This one came just 1 year before Van der Graaf Generator would actually reform and release the very pivotal album of God Bluff. But when it comes to the importance of albums in the prog world, a lot of people would place God Bluff and The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage one next to the other in scale of importance. And personally, I think that the way I could best describe this album by Peter Hamill is by comparing it to the album Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt. A very personal album that talks about oneself and doesn't really concern itself with being accessible or trying to conform to what the masses want to hear, and instead doing something for oneself. Now, you might already know this about me, especially if you've been following this series, that when it comes to the eclectic prog of the early 70s, I am not the biggest taker for it. Bands like King Crimson and Van der Graaf Generator are objectively good, and I have a lot of appreciation to what they do, but when it comes down to me subjectively listening to the music, I don't really get into it, at least not on first glance. And the same sort of feelings I had when listening to today's album. I could eventually just appreciate the music that it was creating, but personally I found myself pretty much indifferent to its music. I must say that I did really like the aesthetic of this one. It feels like a stripped down version of a Van der Graaf Generator album, if you might even say a sort of an unplugged Van der Graaf Generator, although I am well aware that this one is very much plugged. But I think that the keywords when talking about this one has to be raw and being rough around the corners. This album isn't made to perfection and it's seemingly obvious, but what is less obvious maybe is the fact that all of it is pretty much deliberate. At its core, it seems like The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage is an album made entirely by Peter Hamill playing the guitar and the piano, which only later on had several other elements built upon it to create the least amount of sound that you need in order to get the effect across. And that's what I actually really like about this album: the rawness, the bareness of it, the personalness about it, the thing that makes it so unique. And if you're a fan of the Van der Graaf Generator albums and sound and you're looking for something deeper and personal, this one is definitely for you. But if you're like me, you know that this might not be your cup of prog, and personally my favorite track from this album has to be Rubicon, which, as I've seen on Spotify, is the least rated track from this entire album, which just shows me that I am not in the right mindset when listening to this one. Nevertheless, the Peter Hamill discography now stretches for more than 30 albums, and I'm sure there's a lot to dig into with his entire discography, so while I might not like this one that much, I am sure that there's still a lot to explore in his extensive discography alone with Van der Graaf Generator and with other artists. So I totally get why someone would like this cover, but personally I just find it to be kind of repelling. I really don't know how to explain it about this one, but something about it just feels kind of kitschy to me, but at the same time very unprofessional. I really couldn't tell you. I think that my best description with this one would be somewhat of a sketch of the final product, but without the beautifulness of a non-completed sketch to it. I really don't know how to explain it. I just really don't like this cover all that much, and the thing is, I don't think that it really matches the music as well. Nevertheless, that's just me thinking about this cover out loud. I totally get why people would like this one. I would expect myself to like this one, but again, as I said, something about it just doesn't work out for me. So as a whole, this album would be a slightly more than just a neutral album for me, and for that it's gonna get a very proper rating of 6 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to the Underfall Yard by Big Big Train. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wall, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.